The burgeoning trade in Lübeck necessitated stronger alliances. Mayor Johann Wittenborg understood that the city's future depended on securing reliable partnerships with neighboring towns. Hamburg, strategically located on the Elbe River, controlled a significant portion of the trade flowing in and out of the Holy Roman Empire. Its connection to Lübeck was a natural fit. In 1241, Lübeck and Hamburg formalized their alliance, a pivotal moment in the formation of what would become the Hanseatic League. The treaty outlined mutual defense and trade cooperation. Bremen, a key port city on the Weser River, brought valuable access to the North Sea trade routes. Its inclusion was vital for expanding the network. The alliance between Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bremen laid the foundation for a coordinated trading network. Together, they could navigate the Baltic Sea with greater security and efficiency. Riga, strategically positioned on the eastern Baltic coast, became a crucial source of timber, essential for shipbuilding and construction throughout the League. Novgorod, far to the east, controlled access to the lucrative fur trade, linking the Hanseatic network to the vast resources of Russia. The Baltic Sea, while offering rich trade opportunities, presented constant dangers. Storms, piracy, and rival factions threatened the League's fragile network. To mitigate risks, the cities implemented convoy systems, ensuring that merchant ships traveled together for mutual defense against pirates and rival powers. Grain from the eastern territories flowed into the League cities, providing sustenance and fueling economic growth. The standardization of weights and measures ensured fair trade practices. Textiles, crafted in cities like Brunswick, formed another crucial trade commodity. The quality and craftsmanship of these goods were highly valued throughout Europe. By the mid-13th century, the foundation of the Hanseatic League was firmly established. The flow of goods and influence began to reshape the economic and political landscape of Northern Europe, marking the start of a powerful new era. The lifeblood of the Hanseatic League was its maritime power, and the cornerstone of that power was the Hanseatic cog. These sturdy ships, specifically designed for the conditions of the Baltic and North Seas, were the workhorses of the League's trade network. The cog's design was a testament to practicality and innovation. Its flat-bottomed hull allowed it to navigate shallow waters and be easily beached for loading and unloading cargo, a necessity in the often uncharted ports of the Baltic. The single mast and square sail provided ample power for sailing, even against strong winds. The use of clinker-built planks, overlapping each other and fastened with iron rivets, created a strong and watertight hull capable of withstanding the harsh conditions of the northern seas. The cog's capacity allowed for the transport of bulk goods such as timber, grain, and salted fish, which were the staples of Hanseatic trade. These ships weren't built for speed, but for endurance and carrying capacity, making them ideally suited for the long voyages between League cities. Navigation in the Baltic and North Seas was a constant challenge. Hanseatic sailors relied on a combination of practical knowledge, rudimentary charts, and celestial navigation when weather permitted. The magnetic compass, though still a relatively new invention, became increasingly important, especially during overcast days when the sun and stars were obscured. Astrolabes and quadrants aided in determining latitude, allowing sailors to calculate their position relative to the equator, a critical factor in long-distance navigation. The Hanseatic League invested heavily in improving navigational knowledge. Detailed portolan charts, depicting coastlines and harbors, became increasingly common, providing sailors with vital information for safe passage. The efficiency of the cog and the navigational skills of Hanseatic sailors allowed the League to dominate trade in the Baltic and North Seas, connecting disparate regions and facilitating the flow of goods from east to west and north to south. The cog also served as a platform for defense. Armed with cannons and other weaponry, they could protect themselves against pirates and rival powers, ensuring the safety of Hanseatic trade routes. However, the League's dominance was constantly challenged by threats such as piracy. Figures like Klaus Störtebeker and his Victual brothers preyed on Hanseatic ships, disrupting trade and endangering sailors. Despite these challenges, the Hanseatic League continued to adapt and innovate, constantly improving the design of the cog and developing new navigational techniques to maintain its maritime supremacy. The Hanseatic cog, maritime power and innovation. The lifeblood of the Hanseatic League flowed eastward, towards the riches of the Baltic and beyond. Novgorod, a city perched on the edge of the known world, beckoned with promises of furs, wax, and other exotic goods, essential for the burgeoning markets of the West. Novgorod, a vital trading post, served as the eastern anchor of the Hanseatic trade network. The city's marketplace was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and commodities, a testament to the League's reach. The exchange was rarely simple. Hanseatic merchants, known for their shrewdness, engaged in complex negotiations with their Russian counterparts, bargaining over the quality and quantity of goods. Beeswax, vital for candle making and sealing documents, flowed westward in a constant stream, traversing vast distances over land and sea. In return for these eastern treasures, the Hanseatic League supplied the region with cloth, metal goods, and that most essential commodity, salt. The trade with Novgorod was not without its challenges. Political instability, fluctuating currencies, and the constant threat of banditry made it a high-stakes endeavor. The journey between Novgorod and the Hanseatic ports was fraught with danger. Merchants often traveled in armed convoys to protect their valuable cargo from robbers. To facilitate trade and protect their interests, the Hanseatic League established contours, fortified trading posts, in key cities like Novgorod. These served as centers of commerce, diplomacy, and defense. The furs brought from the east adorned the shoulders of nobles and burghers alike, a symbol of wealth and status fueled by the League's eastern trade. The wealth generated by the Baltic trade enriched the Hanseatic cities, funding their growth and solidifying their power. The Hanseatic League's intricate network of trade routes stretched across the Baltic, connecting east and west, and shaping the economic landscape of Northern Europe. The Baltic trade, a source of immense wealth and power, remained a cornerstone of the Hanseatic League's dominance for centuries to come. It was a testament to the power of trade to shape not just economies, but also the destinies of cities and nations. The Baltic Sea, late 14th century. A new terror arose not from kings or rival merchants, but from the sea itself. The Victual brothers, later known as like dealers, pirates who initially supplied victuals to besieged Stockholm, now preyed on all ships, their hunger for plunder insatiable. In Lübeck, Mayor Johann Wittenborg addressed the city council. The like dealers grow bolder. They strike at will, disrupting trade and holding our merchants ransom. We must act decisively to protect our interests. Hanseatic cogs, though sturdy, were often slow and cumbersome. The pirates, in their nimble vessels, easily overtook them. The cry of like dealers became a harbinger of doom for many a Hanseatic merchant. Coastal cities lived in constant fear. Gisela of Brunswick, a noblewoman known for her courage, oversaw the defenses of her family's stronghold. She knew that only vigilance could protect them from the pirate scourge. Wittenborg pleaded with the Hanseatic Diet. We must pool our resources and build a fleet capable of hunting down these pirates. Every city must contribute, or we will all suffer. Queen Margaret I of Denmark watched the pirates rise with growing concern. Their activities threatened not only Hanseatic trade, but also her own kingdom's power in the region. Slowly, the Hanseatic cities began to respond. A united fleet was assembled, its purpose, to hunt down the pirate dens and bring the like dealers to justice. Battles raged across the Baltic. The Hanseatic fleet, though larger, faced a cunning and ruthless foe in Klaus Stortebeker and his like dealers. The fight against the pirates was costly. Wittenborg pored over maps and reports, desperately seeking a way to break the like dealers' stranglehold. The like dealers had secret havens, hidden coves along the Baltic coast where they could repair their ships, divide their plunder, and evade pursuers. Eventually, Stortebeker was captured, betrayed by one of his own crew during a drunken stupor. His reign of terror brought to an end. In Hamburg, Stortebeker met his end. His execution marked a turning point, but the threat of piracy in the Baltic would persist, a constant challenge to the Hanseatic League's dominance. As the 14th century progressed, the Hanseatic League found itself increasingly embroiled in conflicts that threatened its very existence. Denmark, under the ambitious leadership of Queen Margaret I, posed a significant challenge. Margaret I, Queen of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, sought to consolidate her power in the Baltic region. Her ambitions directly clashed with the Hanseatic League's established trade routes and influence. The conflict escalated into open warfare. The Hanseatic League, though primarily a trading alliance, possessed considerable naval strength. Their cogges, normally laden with goods, were now armed for battle. Johann Wittenborg, mayor of Lübeck, played a pivotal role in organizing the Hanseatic defense. He understood that the League's survival depended on a united front. Battles were fought across the Baltic Sea. The Hanseatic fleet, composed of ships from various member cities, engaged the Danish navy in a series of hard-fought engagements. Queen Margaret, a shrewd strategist, pressed her advantage, seeking to control key waterways and ports that were vital to Hanseatic trade. The League faced internal challenges, maintaining unity amongst the diverse cities, each with its own interests and priorities, proved difficult. The Hanseatic League also faced challenges from England. English merchants sought to break the League's monopoly on trade in the North Sea. The League began diplomatic efforts. Tensions eventually erupted into naval skirmishes between Hanseatic and English vessels. The control of trade routes hung in the balance. Diplomacy eventually prevailed. The Hanseatic League negotiated treaties with England, securing its trading privileges while making concessions to English merchants. The conflict with Denmark also ended with a negotiated peace. While Margaret I had initially sought to diminish the League's power, she ultimately recognized the necessity of peaceful trade relations. The wars with Denmark and England tested the Hanseatic League's resilience. While costly, these conflicts ultimately solidified the League's position as a major economic and political force in Northern Europe. They demonstrated the importance of unity and the need to defend their trading interests. The year is 1350. The Black Death, a pestilence unlike any seen before, has swept across Europe, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The Hanseatic League, once a vibrant network of trade and prosperity, now faces its gravest challenge. Lübeck, the queen of the Hansa, feels the icy grip of the plague as acutely as any city. The streets of Hanseatic cities, once teeming with merchants and artisans, are now filled with the sick and dying. Gisela of Brunswick, like many others, dedicates herself to caring for the afflicted, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming despair. The stench of death hangs heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the plague's relentless advance. The Hanseatic council chambers, usually bustling with debate, are now filled with a palpable sense of dread. Johann Wittenborg and his fellow council members grapple with the grim reality. Trade has ground to a halt, ships lie idle in harbors, and the lifeblood of the League is slowly draining away. The Hanseatic Kagas, the workhorses of the League's trade, remain anchored in port, their holds empty. The skilled sailors and merchants who once manned them have fallen victim to the plague. The once vibrant harbors of Danzig, Riga, and other Hanseatic cities are now ghostly reminders of a bygone era. Novgorod, the eastern outpost of the Hanseatic League, suffers greatly. The flow of furs, wax, and timber, essential to the League's trade, has ceased. Warehouses stand empty, and the once thriving trade routes are now silent and overgrown. Years after the peak of the pestilence, Lübeck begins the slow process of recovery. Johann Wittenborg, his face etched with the hardships of the past, rallies the remaining merchants and guild leaders, urging them to rebuild and adapt. The loss of skilled labor forces the Hanseatic cities to adapt. New apprenticeships are established, and surviving artisans work tirelessly to pass on their knowledge. Slowly, workshops begin to hum with activity once more. Trade gradually resumes, albeit at a slower pace. Hanseatic Kagas once again ply the waters of the Baltic and North Seas, carrying vital goods between cities. The League, though diminished, begins to show signs of resilience. The Hanseatic League enacts new regulations to stabilize trade and protect its members. Measures are taken to control prices, standardize weights and measures, and ensure fair competition. The lessons learned from the Black Death are not forgotten. Quality control becomes paramount. Merchants meticulously inspect goods to ensure their value and prevent fraud. The Hanseatic League strives to restore its reputation for reliability and trustworthiness. The lingering effects of the Black Death continue to pose challenges. Labor shortages and economic instability plague the Hanseatic cities. The League's counselors grapple with finding long-term solutions to ensure the survival of their alliance. Decades after the Black Death, the Hanseatic League stands scarred but not broken. The resilience and adaptability of its member cities have allowed it to weather the storm. The League emerges from the crisis with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face the challenges of the future. The League's success bred its own set of problems. Competition amongst member cities intensified, especially over access to lucrative trade routes and resources. Lübeck, as the queen of the Hansa, often found itself mediating disputes and attempting to maintain a semblance of unity. Hamburg and Bremen, both powerful port cities, clashed frequently over control of the North Sea trade. Their merchants, fiercely independent, often prioritized their own city's interests over the collective good of the League. Danzig, a vital hub for grain trade from Poland, resented Lübeck's dominance and sought greater autonomy in managing its own affairs. This created friction within the League's eastern territories. Even inland cities like Brunswick, which benefited from the League's trade network, harbored grievances. They felt marginalized by the powerful coastal cities and sought a greater voice in league affairs. The Hanseatic Diets, gatherings of representatives from member cities, became battlegrounds for these internal disputes. Johann Wittenborg, mayor of Lübeck, often found himself struggling to broker compromises and prevent the league from fracturing. Control over trade routes, especially in the Baltic, was a constant source of contention. Cities like Riga and Reval, Tallinn, vied for dominance in the eastern Baltic, challenging Novgorod's historical influence. The activities of pirates like Klaus Störtebeker exacerbated the tensions within the League. Accusations flew between cities, with some suspecting that certain members were secretly supporting or tolerating piracy for their own gain. Secret alliances and backroom deals became commonplace as cities sought to advance their individual agendas within the League. This eroded trust and weakened the collective strength of the Hanseatic alliance. The contours, established trading posts in key cities like Novgorod and Bruges, also became focal points for internal competition. Merchants from different Hanseatic cities frequently clashed over access to these lucrative markets. Rival powers like Queen Margaret I of Denmark skillfully exploited these internal divisions to weaken the League's influence. She encouraged dissent among member cities, offering preferential treatment to those who aligned with her interests. The lack of a centralized authority and the prioritization of individual city interests often led to inconsistent policies and a failure to address common threats effectively. This vulnerability would eventually contribute to the League's decline. As the 15th century approached, the Hanseatic League stood at a crossroads. The internal strife threatened to unravel the very fabric of the alliance, jeopardizing its future as a dominant force in Northern Europe. The question remained: could the League overcome its internal divisions and adapt to the changing political and economic landscape? The winds of change were blowing across Europe, and the Hanseatic League, once the undisputed master of the Baltic and North Seas, felt the chill. The rise of centralized nation-states was beginning to reshape the political and economic landscape, posing a significant threat to the League's established dominance. England, under strong monarchs, was consolidating power and developing its own merchant fleet, challenging the League's control of the North Sea trade routes. The English crown, eager to break free from Hanseatic dependence, fostered native industries and imposed tariffs on Hanseatic goods. Denmark, though often in conflict with the League, was also consolidating its power and sought greater control over the Sound dues, the lucrative tolls levied on ships passing through the Øresund Strait. This directly impacted Hanseatic trade and revenue. Even the threat of piracy, once largely contained by the League's naval power, was becoming more difficult to manage as centralized states began to invest in their own navies, diverting resources and attention away from the Baltic. In the east, the rise of Poland-Lithuania and the Grand Duchy of Moscow further complicated matters. These expanding powers sought direct access to trade, bypassing the Hanseatic League's intermediary role. Internal divisions within the League exacerbated the problem. The growing disparity between the western and eastern cities led to conflicting interests and a weakening of collective action. The western cities, like Lübeck and Hamburg, often pursued their own agendas, undermining the League's unity. The English, with their burgeoning naval power, began to directly challenge the Hanseatic monopoly on trade routes. English ships, often backed by royal charters, competed fiercely for access to markets previously dominated by the League. The League's inability to adapt to the changing political landscape became increasingly apparent. Its rigid structure and reliance on traditional trade practices hindered its ability to compete with the more flexible and centralized nation-states. The League's diplomatic efforts to maintain its privileges were met with increasing resistance from national monarchs, who saw the League as an obstacle to their own economic ambitions. The Sound dues became a constant source of friction, with Denmark leveraging its control of the strait to extract increasing revenue, further straining the League's resources. The rise of the Dutch Republic as a major maritime power further eroded the League's dominance. Dutch ships, technologically advanced and backed by a powerful trading empire, began to displace Hanseatic vessels in key trade routes. The Hanseatic League, once a mighty force that shaped the economic and political landscape of Northern Europe, found itself increasingly marginalized, its power waning in the face of rising nation-states and shifting trade patterns. The era of its unchallenged dominance was coming to an end. The 15th century dawned upon a Europe transformed. The rise of centralized nation-states, with their powerful monarchs and consolidated resources, presented a formidable challenge to the Hanseatic League's dominance. Changing trade routes further eroded the League's control. The emergence of Antwerp as a major trading center, offering access to goods from the New World and the East, diverted commerce away from the Baltic and North Seas. The Dutch and English, with their powerful navies and aggressive trade policies, emerged as formidable competitors. They challenged the League's long-held monopolies, gradually chipping away at its economic foundation. Internal divisions within the League exacerbated its decline. The larger cities, such as Lübeck and Hamburg, often pursued their own interests, neglecting the needs of smaller members and weakening the alliance as a whole. Disputes over trade privileges, financial contributions, and political influence became increasingly common, undermining the unity that had once been the League's strength. The League's aging fleet struggled to compete with the technologically advanced ships of its rivals. Its inability to adapt to changing naval warfare further hampered its ability to protect its trade routes. The decline of key trading posts, such as the Contour in Novgorod, reflected the League's diminishing influence in Eastern Europe. Shifting political alliances and economic conditions led to its eventual closure. Attempts to reform the League and revitalize its trade proved largely unsuccessful. The Diet, once a powerful assembly, became increasingly ineffective in addressing the challenges facing the alliance. By the mid-17th century, the Hanseatic League was a shadow of its former self. The last official meeting of the League took place in 1669, marking its formal dissolution. Despite its demise, the Hanseatic League left an indelible mark on European history. Its legacy can be seen in the architectural splendor of its member cities and the legal traditions it established. The League's contributions to trade, law, and culture continue to be studied and admired. Its innovative practices and institutions laid the groundwork for modern commercial networks. The spirit of the Hanseatic League, its dedication to free trade and international cooperation, lives on in the interconnected world of today. The seas they once dominated now serve as a bridge, linking nations in a global economy.